What's up, everybody? Welcome to the 4040 Vision podcast. I'm your host, Khaled and I'm joined today by a special guest, Joseph O'Sullivan, who is a freelance football writer who reports particularly on South American football for Forbes.com. How you doing today, Joseph?
Good. Thanks for having me, Khaled. How are you?
I'm doing great. So today's topic is football. We're going to be talking about the Copa America. We're going to be talking about Messi's legacy. We're going to be talking about some of the issues at the Copa America. And then we're going to wrap up with Joseph sharing some of his tales from his football travels and some general football talk at the end here. So let's jump in with the hot topic, which was the Copa America, especially the final. But we'll start with the Copa America in general. One of the main criticisms about it was how poorly planned it was by CONMEBOL, from the stadiums to the field conditions, all that good stuff. Can you give us some insight on what happened with CONMEBOL and where did they drop the ball here?
Yeah, I think in a lot of areas at the end of the day, the biggest error for me was actually on the pitch, which not a lot of people are talking about, but we knew it was a thing even before the tournament, which was the fact that Argentina were on one side of the draw, and their three biggest rivals, Uruguay, Colombia, and of course Brazil, who were the other big contenders going into the tournament, there was no possibility that they could play against each other until the final. So, with all due respect to teams like Canada, who did very well under Jesse Marsh, Venezuela, who have been very good in recent South American World Cup qualifying, and Ecuador, who are also a good team, that was the hardest it could possibly get for Argentina before the final. And then on the other side of the draw, you've got a situation where Colombia can play Brazil in the group and then play them again in the semifinals, or play Uruguay. So I think it was bad for the tournament from the off in that sense, because there was a clear favorite in Argentina, and you just felt like whoever got to the final on the other side, they were going to have to come through two or three big tests just to get there, and it would always be difficult. And that is what happened in the end, because Colombia were very good in the first half against Argentina. Then they just seemed to run out of legs. Obviously, Argentina know how to win tournaments at the minute as well. So
So
that
I have a
was
question
the
for
biggest
you
thing.
on that topic, right? So maybe put our conspiracy theory hats on a little bit, right? So
Mm.
Messi, he's in Miami already, Inter Miami. The finals in Miami. There was some whispers, right,
Yeah,
that they had kind of paved the way for Argentina to have that easier road to the final. Do you give any credence to that?
I wouldn't mistake, uh, or sorry, I wouldn't blame you for thinking that. Put it that way. I wouldn't make the accusation, but the way it's all worked out, and even before the tournament, like we said, it looked like it was going to work out that way. You know, um, People would suggest it's commercial in the first place. The fact that it's in the States and not in South America, the fact that the finals at the Hard Rock Stadium in Miami, as opposed to bigger stadiums in other parts of the country that would traditionally hold finals, like in LA or in New York. And then obviously the Messi mania in the States since he got to Inter Miami. So yeah, I get it. I think it's probably just a bad coincidence, but honestly, you never know. I think it's probably just a bad coincidence. And at the time they did the bracket, they did the draw, they maybe didn't even think that that would be a possibility. And if that was the case, like we said, it was just bad planning on the pitch before the games even got started. And then you mentioned the off-field stuff, um, tickets. Well, first of all, the pitches. No, the
Mhm.
playing
Yeah, it
surfaces
is.
did look really bad. They looked really bad, and a few different players and coaches commented on this openly, and then people sort of refuted the claims, and CONMEBOL, sorry, said no, it's I think they actually came out and said it's like not an optic illusion, but it looks worse on camera, basically. And then when Marcelo Bielsa, the Uruguay manager, of course, finally lost his head in that press conference, which I think was after the Colombia semifinal, he just let it all out.
Mhm.
He came out and said, we're on top of this pitch. We're the ones looking at it, playing on it. It's not fit for purpose. Everyone's saying it for a reason. So that's just that's such a basic thing to get right for a top level football tournament. Have decent football pitches. Uh, which brings us to the next point, which is the stadiums. Obviously, the majority are NFL, American football stadiums.
Yeah, Atlanta,
Uh,
Phoenix, Dallas, New Jersey, Miami, all of
yeah,
them, just about.
built like incredibly well, but for a different purpose, with a different playing surface most of the time. So you're already at a disadvantage before you start having to sort that out. Um, and then there's the fact that these stadiums are massive, and most of them are hours and hours away from each other, even on a flight, you know. Some of the distances traveled by teams, it's like they were spanning different continents, not just playing in one country. I know the States obviously is massive, but we look at the planning for the World Cup in a couple of years' time, and they've already said there'll be an East, Central, and West zone.
Mhm.
For example, if you're in an East group, you'll play only in the East, making things a little bit more manageable for teams. But even then, the distances are crazy. And that's not that big a factor for the teams, but for fans who want to travel the games,
Absolutely.
pay their way, logistics, match tickets, airplanes, hotels. It's just crazy. Throw on top of that the fact that this is predominantly a South American tournament and the general income there is nothing like what it is in the States. You're asking these fans to spend years of work to follow their team around the States. It's almost impossible. So Colombia, Argentina, at times Venezuela brought loads of fans to these stadiums. I think Argentina always filled it, of course, because of
Hmm.
Messi. Colombia more or less looked full every time, even in the semi-final against Uruguay. I think there's 50,000 Colombians, and Uruguay's a lot smaller country, but just the turnout from Colombia, the color was amazing. But then at the same time, the majority of the group games, you're looking at these stadiums and they're half empty. Um,
At best, yeah. I was watching
yeah,
Ecuador, Venezuela, which was it's about 100 miles from here, from where I live, and it was maybe a quarter full. I mean, it's understandable that you're not going to get that much excitement about Ecuador versus Venezuela. It doesn't have the same big names if you're a casual fan, but it was kind of sad to see like a quarter full NFL stadium for that game.
exactly. Exactly. When, I don't know, you could put that in one of the smaller MLS stadiums in a higher populated city, and you know you're gonna make it at least look packed out if you don't sell every single ticket. The roof's lower, you keep the atmosphere in a bit more, and it just feels like a full stadium, even if it's smaller. You know, like I follow the Ireland national team, on our home stadium in Dublin. I think it's just over 50,000, and for friendly matches, you know, you might be getting turnouts of like between 30 and 40,000, depending on the opposition. And it's mad how quiet and empty a place can feel when it's not full to capacity.
Yeah.
You know, I
Mhm.
always say, you know, the association will have their own arguments, but if you could play that in a different city in the country, and if it's 15,000 packed out and they're all delighted to be there, and it, you know, feels like a carnival atmosphere, that's so much better than having 30,000 in a half empty stadium.
Mhm.
So they got that one wrong as well. Um, Tickets, I suppose. I think a lot of the group stage tickets were like between $40 and $60, cheapest ticket. At face value, we say no,
Yeah, face value
face
is the
value.
big important one. Yeah.
And then you look at the resale markets, which I know, if I'm not mistaken, culturally in the States is like a very normal, acceptable thing. I think it's maybe a bit more frowned upon in football in Europe and South America.
Yeah.
Um, Again, like I'm a Liverpool fan, so I'll use what knowledge I have from that. It's like if you're reselling Liverpool tickets to other people at a higher than face value price, it's like you may as well be excommunicated. You know, it's just against the culture. It's against what it's all about. Whereas I know in the States for sports, that's completely normal. Um,
It's almost expected. It's like you have, I mean, individual people doing it obviously, but more so ticket brokers that are buying up tickets in bulk and then reselling them on, sites like TickPick, SeatGeek, whatever. And
yeah,
it's just part of the culture here. And of course, like you said, in Europe, it's not something that people do. I see posts on Facebook and Twitter of Chelsea fan groups that I'm in where people say I'm looking for a spare where they'll be selling their tickets and they have to make sure they're also selling it to a fan of the club, so we're not getting mixes in the other stands and things like that. So such a different culture. So it's going to be, I think, a big culture shock for people. It probably was a culture shock for people that came over for the Copa, and then even more so for the World Cup.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't know how they're going to manage that in the World Cup. I feel like I read recently that they're going to try and sort it out because, you know, it's just not accepted a lot in other places. And apart from that, just the prices. I looked at Brazil, Colombia, just out of interest, the group game a couple of days before, and there were tons of tickets going on resale websites for like $400, $500, $600. And it's like that was the biggest game of the group stage, the most romantic one in terms of stars on both teams. Both teams could win the group, they could potentially win the tournament. And for the resale market, you're maybe, I suppose, denying genuine fans the ability to go when a face value ticket might be 5 or even 10 times less.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way it's looked at in Europe anyway.
It's true.
Which, yeah,
That's the
it's
accurate
like
view.
that, yeah, it's fair enough. And then for the final, again, out of interest, I was looking in the like 3 days lead up to the final, and the prices were just crazy. As soon as Messi got there, I think actually a lot of Argentines anticipated that they'd probably get there, and they overpaid for tickets early. Like I saw videos from Argentinian media. Guys are paying $2,000 or $3,000 for a ticket on a resale site, and that was months ago.
Yeah.
So then Colombia qualify, and you've got a lot of Colombians in the States, but you've also got a lot of Colombians who've made the trip, and they're thinking, look, it's once in a lifetime thing. I'm gonna pay whatever for a ticket, and yeah, your average fan may as well forget about trying to go to the match. It's just not happening. It gets so expensive. So how much CONMEBOL thought about that before? I don't know. Maybe they didn't care beforehand, but now they know how it affects the crowds. And I wrote during the tournament, and I spoke about that Venezuela Ecuador game you were talking about, because for me that should have been an exciting one. I know there's lots of Venezuela fans, and also they're two teams that seemed like evenly matched. You felt like that was a game to see who gets out of the group,
Mm-hmm.
and it just was a bad advert for the Copa America. Because you're seeing games of a similar magnitude in Europe, but the place is just full, just bursting with color and passion, which is exactly what we associate with South American teams. So they definitely got that one wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. And you talked about the final and the tickets. So the final was a bit of a disaster, to put it mildly. So it started, I think, 90 minutes late because fans stormed the gates. There's the viral video of fans climbing through the ventilation, trying to get into the stadium. I think a lot has been said about how CONMEBOL dropped the ball again and really failed their fans and the average fans and just people in general trying to buy tickets, and the authentic fans that maybe didn't or bought tickets but couldn't get in, and of course the folks that hopped the fence and did all kinds of things like that. So what was the biggest failure in that situation?
For me, having been at the Champions League final in Paris a few years ago between Liverpool and Real Madrid, security was the biggest failure. Now, I know CONMEBOL have said, even though they're organizers, that that's not all on them. They brought out a statement saying how, for contractual reasons, that was under the authority of the stadium. Um, it's hard to know those internal talks, contracts, what's going on. What's for sure is whoever was responsible to what percentage, that it wasn't done well, and yeah, it looked. I won't even compare whether it looked worse or not than Paris a few years ago, but it's the same problem. And you're thinking, when are these organizers, whoever they are, gonna learn the lesson? Um, some of the videos and the scenes were just horrible. You could tell people were like suffering. I was in Spain, and earlier that day I'd watched Spain England in the Euros final. Obviously, stayed up to watch the Colombia Argentina game, which was meant to start 2 a.m. local time, essentially Monday morning in Spain. And yeah, I think it was like 3:45 a.m. by the time the match started. And at that stage, all the videos are coming through on social media. And at that stage, I was thinking, honestly, this game shouldn't be played
Yeah,
because
I think a lot of
I
people
was
had that
really,
thought.
I thought I'd be shocked if there's no casualties, to be honest, seeing the scenes, things like asphyxia or especially when you consider the heat. Oh, it was a complete disaster. And the thing that occurred to me when we were in Paris at that final, which I also went to the European Championships in France in 2016. And if I remember correctly, what they did is before the
And this was
stadium.
France Portugal, so it was the host nation in the final, right? So it
Yeah, I wasn't
was a
at the
big deal.
final, but I was at the tournament. I went to every Ireland game at the tournament, which included, a big game against Sweden, Stade de France, the last group game against Italy to qualify, big tournament occasions. But if I'm not mistaken, let's say a kilometer before the stadium, before the ticket check, you have the sort of external perimeter ticket check. Now I know what if around that time in France there was a few of the terrorist incidents and stuff in Europe at the time, it was definitely a big worry. So they ramped up security for that. Um, but in doing so, what they did was also sort of stop this kind of squeeze, crush, crowd trouble, whatever you want to call it. And then for the final since then, they haven't had that perimeter. So you can not have a ticket to the match and be in literally you can touch the gate, you know? So of course you have people come in without tickets, whether or not they're told to is another thing. There's like a small culture, I would say, amongst European teams of the odd fan trying to chance it without having a ticket, thinking, I'll see what I can do. I'll see if I can
Slip by a security
slip
guard or
in.
climb a
That's
gate or
right. Yeah, yeah,
something.
yeah.
Yeah.
Slip by. But in South America, it's more like a culture, like by any means necessary. The whole football is religion thing is taken to the extreme. Whether or not you agree with it is another debate. Obviously, it goes literally to criminal levels. But their Boca Juniors or River Plate every weekend. Doesn't matter if you have a ticket. If you're not in the ground, maybe like an hour before, you're not getting in anyway because a lot of people will pay security guards, get in, and that'll be fine. A lot of people will go in with the right people, like the ultras groups, and it's essentially lawless. They can bring in as many people as they
Yeah,
want.
they're not checking tickets for those guys.
Exactly. Those guys literally run the place. That's another story. So for CONMEBOL or the authorities to not sort of think of this, because for a lot of those people, it's the biggest game of their lives in their eyes. And, you know, in hindsight, a lot of people were going to do whatever they needed to do. Colombia haven't been in a major final since they won the Copa America in 2001. So what happened uh, in terms of organization was terrible, was out of order. In terms of what happened, people trying to get into the stadium, scaling walls and climbing through air vents and all that stuff, that's unacceptable too. And it just was the the perfect storm, no?
Mhm.
Created all this trouble. It looks bad on South American football. It looks bad on CONMEBOL. It doesn't look great on the US or US football or US authorities ahead of the World Cup. Even though it may not necessarily be their fault or all their fault, still doesn't look good 2 years ahead of the World Cup. Um, so yeah, I was just glad there was no serious injuries on the day, to be honest, because it looked
Yeah,
nasty.
I think we dodged a massive bullet there, and I think the most shocking thing for U.S. fans is that I mean we've hosted Olympics, we host the Super Bowl every not host, we have the Super Bowl every year, we have
Yeah,
major sporting events, and we've never seen anything like that. I mean even in the '94 World Cup, but soccer interest wasn't at the same level as it is now in this country, but I think there was a lot of lessons learned. You mentioned the perimeters. I saw a lot of talk about that, where they use it as a filter, basically, to keep riffraff, whatever word you want to use, as far
yeah,
away from the stadium as possible.
yeah,
And then it creates a better atmosphere directly around the stadium. And I've read, I think it was Philadelphia, they put out a report where their plan, because they're hosting some World Cup matches, and that's exactly what they're going to do. They're going to have 3 or 4 checkpoints as you get, a mile away, half a mile, quarter mile, whatever it is. So we don't see a repeat of this. But it's just so anti-American sports culture to see people climbing in events and
Yeah, I can
jumping
imagine
gates and things like that. So
that locals watching on their heads must have been falling off, thinking, what are these people doing here? It's funny, I'd
yeah.
say, like, where we are in, I know Europe is a broad term, but in terms of like soccer and even live sports culture between the US and South America, we're probably like right in the middle in terms
Hmm.
of in the US, it's, by the book, letter of the law. In South America, it's borderline lawless. And then in Europe, we've sort of got a bit of both at times, depending on the place or the match. So I see both sides of it. And in hindsight, yeah, two worlds collided, and one was, you've got these. I don't know if they're minimum wage workers or volunteer workers, just young guys
They're
arriving
overwhelmed.
in the
They,
door,
yeah.
and they're just overwhelmed and they've never experienced anything like it. Meanwhile, you've probably got some of the guys on the other side thinking this is the easiest bunk. We say this is the easiest time I'll get into a stadium without a ticket in my life. So
Hmm.
recipe for disaster.
Yeah,
They should have they should have seen it coming.
for sure. So
Um,
let's
Nothing happened. Hopefully, lessons learned.
yeah, plenty of lessons learned. So let's talk about the action on the field. We have plenty of talk about the fields or the pitches and the stadiums. So with this Copa America, Messi and Argentina, this generation, they've now won three major international tournaments in a row, which I believe is only the second time this has happened. I think Spain won Euro, World Cup, Euro. So those three back to back to back. Did this win have any impact on Messi's legacy? I think a lot of people already had him as the GOAT, but does this change? Does it just add to the resume or does it change anything at all?
Yeah. The latter for me, it adds to the resume. It's another trophy in the cabinet, I don't think it changes his legacy because of the World Cup, simply. It's not a bad thing to win another Copa America, but um, before the last Copa America title that they won in Brazil during the COVID lockdown, he lifted that burden of not having won a trophy with Argentina. And at that stage, I think everyone was very happy, as in he's in the latter stage of his career. People perhaps didn't expect a World Cup winning Qatar. Parts of the Argentina team were maybe young or unknown. You look at the trio of Julian Alvarez, Alexis McAllister, Enzo Fernandez. Um, Enzo Fernandez and Julian Alvarez had been brilliant for River Plate the year prior. But the season of the World Cup, Enzo was at Benfica. Julian Alvarez was still, a young striker trying to break in, and McAllister was doing well, but he was still at Brighton. So they were an example of three players who you wouldn't say, yeah, that's a World Cup winning player, and just everything just clicked. The tactics were amazing. The balance of the team was perfect. Guys like Molina, Montiel, even Dibu Martinez in goal. Everyone just coming out of nowhere, playing their part, and everyone just it became the perfect supporting act for the magic of Messi. So I think Argentina would have hoped for it, but not expected it. So then when that happened, as if we didn't have him as the GOAT already, it was just, he could have hung his boots up the next day and never
Oh,
ever
for
ever
sure.
played football ever again. And no one would have said a word to him. I would have been happy as Larry. So I think this is another trophy in the cabinet, but I don't think in 20 years' time anyone will say, remember that second Copa I won, especially given the nature of it and the run and the fact that, he looked injured during the tournament, probably was injured, then got injured again in the final, and he didn't really shine, did he? So it's another trophy in the cabinet, but Qatar was the be all and end all really for Messi. What
Yeah.
happens now? I think unless he makes some sort of cameo appearance at the next World Cup and somehow they win it, and even if he is on the pitch for a while, then that is the only thing in terms of two World Cups, even if he doesn't really play that much, that could elevate the status more. Apart from that now, uh no, can't really change the legacy. It's hard to make the perfect career better, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean it's crazy to think. I mean, pre that first Copa America that they won, I believe was 2020. He had a reputation not for, I don't want to say choking, but kind of, right? I mean, they lose the final to Germany and Brazil. They lose on penalties in the Copa America final to Chile. So he
Uh,
doesn't have a sparkling reputation, you know. And there's a lot of talk of, oh, this guy's not Maradona. He's great for Barcelona. He does all this stuff, but when he puts on the blue and white, he's not the same player. So what shifted? You mentioned a lot of these young guys. I mean, I think for me, it's probably Emi Martinez is probably the biggest candidate as like the catalyst for the change. But what changed between pre 2020 Copa America to everything else that Messi and Argentina have achieved since?
oof, it's a great question. I mean, I don't think even the 2014 team when they lost the final in Germany, when you looked at some of the best teams at the time, the likes of the Germany team that won that tournament, the Spanish team that won in 2010, which was half of his Barcelona teammates, the Barcelona teams he played in, the France team that won 2018, on paper or for a constant period during that decade, Argentina and Brazil were not competing with European sides. And on paper, they really didn't look as good. You had that amazing Uruguay team with Suarez and Forlan, but then again, Uruguay is a population of like 4 million. You know, for them getting to a World Cup semi-finals, incredible. Even though they have won two in the past, so I think he was unlucky that he didn't have a team around him. And as opposed to maybe him choking, it was more a case of him hauling the team to the final and just not being able to quite get them over that last step. You know, Gonzalo Higuain gets a lot of stick for missing a couple of big chances in that final against Germany and Brazil. And it almost looked like it was going to be Lautaro Martinez in Qatar. I think in extra time, even in the last minute of extra time, he had a couple of chances that he really should have stuck away. And you're thinking, surely not. Um, it's tournament football. There's definitely a lot of luck involved, but I think they got the team right. They got the balance right. And something changed in him as well. I think maybe the fact that the pressure was off a little bit, the fact that he wasn't expected to win it. I think he had 6 penalties at the World Cup and he scored 5, and his technique seemed different. When you think of the Messi of the past, he would miss. His penalty ratio wouldn't be the same
Yeah, it
as
was
that.
not
I
his strong
remember,
suit for sure.
yeah, a massive penalty against Chelsea in the Champions League semi-final at his peak, and he smashed it off the bar, I think. And so I think maybe I'm sure there was some serious, whether it was soul searching or psychology, or he just sort of found peace. But that penalty in the shootout against France in the final was nonchalant. You know, it was ridiculous. Like I wouldn't have said Messi's capable of that style of penalty. Um, you know, he'd sort of freeze up and smash it in the past, and he's just rolled it in. And you're thinking something has to have happened there. Maybe when they won Copa America, that lifted a weight off. Because I
Hmm.
spoke to a lot of people when I was living in Argentina, and I couldn't believe that a lot of them didn't believe in Messi. They were like, "Yeah, he
No,
doesn't
not at
deserve
all.
it." But
Yeah,
yeah,
they had a lot of
only
criticism.
I'd say a minority, but yeah, a lot of criticism that he does it for Barca and not for Argentina. And the problem for Messi is you're getting compared to Diego Maradona, which not only was he, you know, arguably the joint best, second best, best ever player, whatever, but he did bring that World Cup to Argentina. And even bigger than that, he was a cultural figure in Argentina that went beyond football, almost
Hmm.
like a political leader. Um, that was a voice for like the Pueblo de Argentina, no, the Argentinian people.
Hmm.
And Messi's never been that guy. And for a lot of people, that transferred to you, like, you know, that and the fact that he grew up for a lot of time in Barcelona, that he wasn't as interested, which is clearly never true. You know, he still speaks with an accent more Argentine than, like, it's incredible that he still speaks that way because he went to Spain when he was like 13, but there was
Hmm.
never any question in that for me. Um, so yeah, it's impossible to put your finger on one. Probably the perfect storm. I think he was older, more mature. and they just built the perfect game plan, defensive team, really solid, and just let him do
Yeah.
his thing. Yeah.
And speaking of Maradona, I mean, you talked about his cultural place in Argentina and the impact that he had not just on the pitch but off the pitch. And I think it's a really complicated place when it comes to the racial politics and everything involved in Argentina. And again, what Maradona represented versus what Messi represented, maybe the more European versus the more South American. But we'll stick to on the pitch so we don't get delved too
Yeah, so
deep
we don't
into
get in
that.
trouble. And like, spending time in Argentina, and I've got a lot of amazing friends in Argentina, but it really is like it's a siege mentality. Um, it's us against the world, like that sort of crazy passion that you see. That's not like there's no acts they do. They think it's them against the world, and you don't want to be critical or offensive in any way because they're both amazing in their own way. And there are there are people in Argentina who would be like, "Oh, Maradona's off the pitch stuff. That means that he didn't do it for me."
True, true.
They're a minority. But you can't walk down the street in Buenos Aires or in Naples, for that matter, without seeing his face on the walls or tattooed on people's legs. When you go to any club in Buenos Aires, big or small, if he played for them or not, his face is on the flags, his name's everywhere. So because he spoke out about political things and
Mhm.
that was his deal, he made himself a figure for the working class people in Argentina, which is the majority of the country. Messi never got involved in that thing. He grew up away from home, um, but they've both done it in the end. They both lifted the World Cup, and so
Yeah.
now you've seen Messi pop up a lot more. Um, Maybe when he retires, he'll be on the walls even more. When he's older, even more. And one day, when he's in a better place, he'll be everywhere because that's the way it is in Argentina. Like these godlike figures that the football creates.
Hmm. Yeah, they get all kinds of love everywhere you look. So, in terms of on the field or on the pitch achievements, did this Copa America, did this make this particular generation the best Argentinian team ever or the greatest Argentinian team ever?
Perhaps Argentina obviously now have won 16 Copa Americas, 3 World Cups. I think it's between, three in a row hasn't been done before, and Messi is possibly the best player of all time. So it's hard to argue against that because they haven't achieved that. But then if you look at the Argentina team, Maradona's team of the late 80s and even the early 90s, when for bans and personal reasons Maradona didn't play, like they won the World Cup in 86, got to the final at Italia 90, and then they won without Maradona back to back Copa Americas in 1991 93 when Batistuta became the next great Argentinian forward and went on to have an amazing career. So the fact that they got to back World Cup finals and back to back Copa America wins all in the space of 6 or 7 years, and it was Maradona's time as well for the first part. It's between that era and this one. Um, in Argentina, anyone who's maybe like 30, 35 or under says that Messi's the best player of all time. And anyone in the generation above and beyond says that it's Maradona. So it's maybe the same thing, it's who's grown up with that team being their team. Uh, I'm going to have to sit on the fence in this one. I think on paper, maybe this one, but it's close. It's close.
Yeah, yeah. I don't like to do cross generational
Yeah,
comparisons.
it's a different game as well, isn't it? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, a different game. I mean, it's a whole different experience on and off the field. They're playing with different equipment, the recovery stuff, the training stuff, the sports science. Everything is just so different that it's really hard to compare between eras. But I know it's fun for people to do. So
Yeah, yeah.
I had to ask the question at least.
No problem.
Uh, so we're heading into the Olympics in about a week, which is probably a lesser heralded football tournament, but it's still a great one. Do you have any thoughts on the favorites coming in? What do you expect to see? Because it's kind of it's a mix of like a U23, but also some senior players. So what should we expect from football at the Olympics?
Yeah, it's a weird tournament, for want of a better phrase, isn't it? Because it falls just as the South American season, for example, is getting back underway after Copa America. Brazil, the season never stopped. But also the European season is literally just beginning, where even most of the major South American players play. So it's a really weird one for that. It's not traditionally an Olympic sport, and definitely a lot of the European teams very much use it as like the B team or the under 23s, under 21s. It's an opportunity to go and play tournament football. But then again, most of those guys are probably starting in top league clubs at this stage, and the clubs don't want them to go. So, you see a real random mix of teams and a random mix of squads. The interesting thing about this one is that it's Argentina in France. And if you spend time in Argentina after the World Cup, you know that as well as celebrating their own victory, they still like to remind France that they lost that final. Mbappe made some comments, I think years before the last World Cup final, about, basically the level of European teams is better, which at the time was kind of true. They'd won, I think, 4 European teams had won 4 consecutive World Cups, but that was used to fuel the fire in Argentina. Mbappe was public enemy number one. Uh, Lots of abuse thrown at the TV screen towards Mbappe, who obviously had what he did in that final was magnificent, worthy of winning probably any game. Um, so since then, it's been what did you say, Mbappe? What was that about South American teams? They say Primera Argentina, Segunda Francia, Argentina first, France second. But
Hmm.
like, and this is like a cultural joke now. Anything, I'm gonna do this first, and then they'd be like, "Y Segunda Francia, I'm France second." It's a thing that's the words hurt, and they've used it, and it's kept going. It's kept going. So they're bringing 4 World Cup winners. Julian Alvarez is going. Otamendi's going. And they're playing against France, or at some stage against France, hopefully, if they both go the whole way in the Olympics in France. So for Argentina, it's massive. They'd love to win it. And I'm going to use Colombia versus Spain in March international friendly as an example. South American teams don't do friendlies. So the European sides might be looking at this as like a little under 21, under 23 tournament. They've got bigger plans. For those Argentina lads going to this, it's like the World Cup, which
Might as
sounds,
well be, yeah.
but yeah,
Hmm.
if you're gonna go, you may as well win the thing. But it's a different level. They're looking at it like it's another tournament. I saw a graphic on Argentine media the other day after Southgate left England, and it sort of looked at all Southgate's results, how he'd done at tournaments. But the interesting thing was that it included the UEFA Nations League, which in
Oh,
Europe
okay.
we
Yeah.
look at as glorified friendly matches.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I think of it. So,
Yeah. Whereas in South America, there's just no such thing. That Colombia Spain game, Spain started the game off really well. And in the second half, Colombia turned them over, and it really was a case of they wanted it more. They looked like they were playing in the World Cup. So if France and Argentina get to play each other at the Olympics this summer, then that's a game worth tuning into, to be honest. But apart from that, I think it will be, yeah, it's a hard tournament to get excited for, even as a football fan.
yeah. I mean, I enjoy it from like a developmental perspective. You get to
Yeah.
see some non-traditional football nations at a quote unquote major tournament like Iraq
Mhm.
is going to be playing. I forget what group they're in, but countries, the smaller countries that you would only see maybe at an Asia Cup or something like that, they get to make an appearance on the global stage. And I know you said it's not traditionally a Olympic sport, but it's still fun to me.
Yeah, it's a bit like the Confederations Cup when that
Yeah,
happens.
there you go.
You'll have like a New Zealand in there, or like a Saudi Arabia in there, and then you'll have like Germany and Brazil. And then I saw as well that some of the games are in like Bordeaux. They're not like, it's obviously like not even like all the games are concentrated in Paris. So it's a weird tournament, but yeah, take away from it, it's a good chance to look at young players. Like I know Messi won gold at Beijing 2008, if I'm not mistaken, with
Yeah,
Argentina.
it's definitely a stage for these younger guys that are
Yeah.
maybe this guy's next step. Yeah, I think Neymar, I want to say they won a gold medal
Neymar won it
at
in
some point.
Brazil
Yeah.
at home, and he had already made it at that stage. But I think he scored the winning penalty, and he fell on the ground, started crying, like they'd won the World Cup.
Mhm.
So it's great that the South American teams take it that seriously, and yeah, hopefully we get an Argentina France game. That would be good.
Yeah, I'm excited for, I mean, for the capper of what they've been calling the summer of soccer here. So I'm excited for that aspect. And then of course we're leading up into the World Cup in a couple years, which should be incredible. Hopefully we still have a country. I mean, I don't know how closely you've been following U.S. politics
Been
this year,
following
but
it a little bit.
there's a
I
lot
wouldn't
going
say
on.
too much, but it's exciting. Well, it's not. Well, yeah, I'll not say
I
that.
don't know. Yeah, I don't know if exciting. So
Exciting's
it's
not the right word.
dramatic.
It
We'll
is
say
exciting.
that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So where can people follow you? You're a great follow on Instagram. When I found you on Matchmaker, I started following you. You got some great content. You've super well traveled with some amazing football experiences. So where can people follow you and see your work?
yeah. So it's the actually named at Football Travel Man on Instagram and on TikTok. Although I should pay more attention to that. And yeah, I put up all my articles on there that I write for Forbes about South American football. I'm also working for an Italian football site at the minute. And there's lots of travels planned. Actually, I'm going to Italy for a month in September, watching a lot of games there, covering games there. And then I'm heading down to South America for a bit to hopefully before Christmas take in some games in Argentina and Brazil. And yeah, try and get some content up and try and open the door a bit for people, not just to see like what the score is or what the stadium is, but
Hmm.
how teams and people and countries in South America just it's a different ball game. They live football differently. Um, they party different, they eat different, life's different, and the way they live their lives around football is different too. So yeah, hopefully there'll be some good content from those travels. Yeah.
Any plans to come out to the U.S. before the World Cup, see our soccer culture?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of the Club World Cup next summer.
Okay.
I'd love to be at the World Cup in 2026. Hopefully, I'm getting paid to do so, and I'm working on it. If not,
Sure.
the other option is to go as an Ireland fan. Whether or not we're going to qualify doesn't look good at the current state. But yeah, hopefully I'll be there. I've spent time in the States before, and I'll watch some MLS games, and it's completely different. Don't get me wrong. But in a way, part of it is definitely refreshing. Like I'm absolutely exhausted now after a season. Or when you follow European and South American football, there's no time off reason. There's literally no
Yeah,
time.
yeah, that's all year.
So yeah, I wouldn't mind doing that. But yeah, the thought of the World Cup in 2026 and the addition of Mexico and Canada as hosts, like I've actually watched Toronto FC. I've never been to Mexico. I'd love to go, but I think a lot of people now are starting to think about it, plan their routes, save up a little money. So hopefully that is just one big football party in 2 years.
Yeah, and hopefully we're a little more prepared than we were for the
And
Copa
hopefully
America
the
and the
teams
Copa
play
final.
better too.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
And Mexico.
Yeah,
Canada look good there, but yeah, if the home teams are well, if there's no issues off the pitch, then yeah, be a great tournament.
cool. Well, thank you. Really appreciate it. This was a great chat. Again, make sure to follow Joseph at Football Travel Man again on Instagram and the TikTok that he doesn't pay much attention to, but
Yeah.
the Instagram is especially great. So thank you. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Khaled. Pleasure, mate. Thank you.